Hey, how you still on my channel and you don't know what TDF is? I'm just fucking with you, bro. I know you know what that shit is. Y'all niggas know what this is. It's to die. Everybody else, welcome back to the mob. This is the first video you viewing on my channel. My channel is all about tireless, deft, finesse. In other words, TDF. In other words, peeping the game and finessing accordingly. It's to die for. Today I'm gonna do something a little different. I'm gonna do commentary on a Malcolm X. I think one of Malcolm X's first televised appearances on television. And actually, those of y'all that have been on my channel long enough, I've actually done this reaction before, except the first time I was on camera. But I ended up taking the video down. I didn't like the direction my channel was heading. But with that being said, I done mastered this voiceover shit, or I done gotten better at it, so I figured I might as well do that again. So without further ado, let's get right to it. On some TDF shit. It's to die for. So it's gonna be Malcolm X versus four white folks, four white men. You already know, those of you that have experience with white men, you already know they're gonna play passive aggressive games. They're gonna play the two-faced game. They might smile in his face, act like they fuck with him. They're gonna try to trip him up. So the whole point of this video is to focus on Malcolm, how he answers the questions, how he thinks, his mannerisms, his gesticulations, all that shit. Get all that shit down and just understand it. Let's continue.
Good afternoon. No matter what your point of view may be, there is significant in the growth in Chicago and across the United States, if not around the world, of a movement known as the Black Muslims, a movement which is popularly believed to preach a doctrine of hatred for the white race and the ultimate supremacy of the Negro race. The headquarters of the Muslim movement is here in Chicago in the 5300 block of South Greenwood, and its leader now is known as Elijah Muhammad. He's in residence here. The most active person in the spreading of the Black Muslim movement is Elijah Muhammad's second in command, who calls himself Malcolm X. And Malcolm X is our guest today on City Desk. Across the desk, our panelists this week are NBC Newsmen Charles McCune, Floyd Calver, and Len O'Connor. And Mr. X, may I begin by asking you, if you will please, outline for us the platform and policies of the Muslim organization.
Well, the platform that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, our religious leader, stands upon is the platform of complete freedom, justice, and equality for the 20 million black people, or so-called Negroes here in America. And he teaches us that because of the seriousness of the condition that our people now find themselves in, that it's absolutely impossible to solve our problems with means other than religion. And he teaches us that the religion of Islam is the only religion that will instill within our people the incentive to stand on our own feet. And instead of trying to force ourselves upon whites or force ourselves into the white society or blame the white man for our predicament and constantly beg him for what he has. He says that the only way that we can solve our problem is to unite together among ourselves, among our own kind, clean ourselves up, rid ourselves of the evils that we've become addicted to here in this society, and try and solve our problem ourselves.
And
So, for those of you brothers that don't even know who Malcolm X is, I'm pretty sure at this point, just after hearing that response, you guys understand why we didn't hear shit about this man when we were coming up in school. And for those of you that are still in school, I think at this point you understand why you didn't hear nothing about Malcolm X, or you don't hear anything about Malcolm X in school. He just outlined what his team, the Nation of Islam, what their position on black issues, what it is as far as what the solution was, which is complete separation. Come up with a solution by yourself or by ourselves. Right? You think about everything that's going on right now with the George Floyd situation and all the protests. I mean, if this man could see what was going on, I know he'd have a field day with this shit. You got so-called black men marching alongside white women, Mexicans, so-called Asians, so-called Middle Eastern people. And, aesthetically, I guess it looks good. Everybody says the right thing. Everybody acts like they're so offended. Everybody acts like they're so hurt. They've been so affected by the George Floyd situation and just police brutality in general. But the reality is, none of these demographics, really outside of the so-called black man in this country, give a fuck about what happens to the so-called black man. You understand? And if you're somebody that's hearing this and you disagree, then please kindly explain to me when you've ever been in a situation, in a dynamic, in which you were the only so-called black person and you were able to garner any kind of real respect, any kind of real regard. Tell me a situation in which you were the only black man present and you were able to retain any peace of mind, get any kind of peace of mind from that situation. No, it doesn't happen. You're always on your toes. You always got to pay attention to everybody and everyone and everything. And 9 times out of 10, if you stay in that situation long enough, you get fucked over anyway. So now looking back at, what does it say? It said 1963. Looking back at 1963, it seems the Nation of Islam had that figured out already. Malcolm X had that figured out already. We not about to fuck with all these other demographics. Let's stick to ourselves and figure out the problem, or identify the problem and figure out the solution amongst ourselves. Let's continue.
I referred to the popular belief that the Muslims preach a hatred for the white race. You do not subscribe to this, then?
No, I've never heard the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teach or preach hatred for anyone. He preaches hatred against evil, against drunkenness, against dope addiction, against poverty, and against having to beg for the things that a man is supposed to have. But I've never heard him teach us or any of his followers hatred toward any human being.
Do you think that some of his followers possibly then have misinterpreted the word that they've heard? And
you see the slick shit that this white man is doing right here? He asked the question, said something about referring to the popular belief that Muslims preach hatred, a hatred doctrine for white people. Malcolm X, of course, he answers the question. He answers it directly. No, we do not do that. Then the white boy, he doubles back and says, well, do you think that certain people must have misinterpreted? So essentially, he's asking the same question twice. What I tell y'all at the beginning of the video, These white folks, they were gonna do what? They were gonna pull some sneaky shit, some slick shit, ask the same question twice, right? Try to fool you, try to play you, try to knock you off your feet, knock you off balance. That's why you gotta stay sharp, you gotta stay deft, you gotta be tireless, and you definitely gotta have finesse. Let's continue.
Follow a practice of hatred for the white race.
I don't think that any Muslim practices hatred toward anyone. We have businesses around the country that are patronized by whites, and we have many businesses here in Chicago, and our customers are white as well as our own kind. And a white person can go into any of these places of business, and he'll have to admit that he is treated with more respect, and he finds more dignity there than he will find among the so-called Negroes who profess to be teaching love for everyone.
You've twice you've referred to the Negroes, the so-called Negroes. You find some fault with this description,
Yes.
I gather.
Mr. Muhammad teaches us that Negro is a term that was applied to us during slavery by the slave master. And right today, it's a term that is used only to point out the descendant of slaves. It's never used for black people, period. Africans can come to this country. They aren't called Negroes. And if they are called Negroes, they resent it. So if Negro meant black, as we've been taught, it would be a term that would be applicable to or pliable to everyone. But he says that it is something that means a slave, or something who is, it means something that has been left out of society, politically, economically, educationally, and otherwise.
You don't think of it as an anthropological term?
Definitely.
See how this white boy keeps doing this shit? He'll ask you a question, let you answer that question in its entirety, and then he'll just ask the same question again. So now, after asking the previous question, why you don't like the term Negro, Malcolm answers it, of course, saying how that term really just denotes that you're a descendant of slaves, and that Africans ourselves, we don't even accept that term Negro. After he answers the question, now the white boy says, "Oh, so you don't think of it as an anthropological term?" Well, what did I just say? You see, but then if you say that, now they can play you. They can use your image against you. They can say that you're too combative. They can say that you're a know-it-all. They can say that you're mean, you know? But all you're really doing essentially is just standing up for yourself. Being a man, you're being direct. So you gotta be calm, collected, you gotta be cool. Let's go back a little bit.
It's not it means something that has been left out of society, politically, economically, educationally, and otherwise.
You don't think of it as an anthropological term?
Definitely. It's not an anthropological term. It's a slave term. And it was a term that was invented in America and was used by the slave makers, slave traders, and slave masters, and attached to the property or the chattel or merchandise that our people represented in that particular day.
Mr. O'Connor.
What is your real name?
Malcolm X.
Is that your legal name?
As far as I'm concerned, it's my legal name.
Have you been to court to establish the
I didn't have to go to court to be called Murphy or Jones or Smith. Excuse me for answering you this way.
That's
if
all right.
A Chinese person were to say his name was Patrick Murphy,
Malcolm said, "Excuse me for answering you this way." That white man said, "That's all right. I'm still gonna get you. Don't worry."
you would look at him like he's insane, because Murphy is an Irish name, a European name, or the name that has a Caucasian or white background. And a yellow person, Chinese is a yellow man, and he has nothing to do or no connection whatsoever with the name Murphy. And if it doesn't look proper for a person who is yellow or Chinese to be walking around named Murphy or Jones or Johnson or Bunch or Powell, I think it would be just as improper for a black person or the so-called Negro in this country, as we're taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, to walk around with these names. And therefore he teaches us that during slavery, the same slave master who owned us put his last name on us to denote that we were his property. So that when you see a Negro today who's named Johnson, if you go back in his history, you'll find that he was once his grandfather, or one of his forefathers was owned by a white man who was named Johnson. His name is Bunch. His grandfather was owned by a white man that was named Bunch.
But actually, brothers, this is where Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam, and really even a lot of so-called black people today, they have it wrong. You see, this education system, this society, they want to teach that every so-called black person or any person that's mixed with so-called black in this country is a descendant of a West African slave of the uh, of the slave trade. But actually, the reality is that so-called black is indigenous to every part, and if not every part, damn near every part of the world. Meaning what? The original Europeans were so-called black. Africa, of course, so-called black. The original Australians, so-called black. Black is indigenous to every part of the world. So if you keep that in mind, you could really be from anywhere. And when this country was founded, a lot of immigrants came here from Europe. And if you double check, a lot of you guys have last names that are considered to be Welsh last names, I believe. You know, a lot of you guys have European last names. But again, there's an agenda in this country, in this society. They need so-called blacks and even Africans to have an inferiority complex to everybody else. So what? They'll tell you that Africa is just one big jungle, you know, with people, no clothing, no shelter, no food, no water. And then they'll tell the so-called black men in this country that your descendants came from over there. We snatched them up from Africa and we brought them here. And we worked them and out you came down the road. So when you sit down and you think about it, brother, it is too convenient. Every African in this country came from a village. No food, no water. And then every black man in this country is a descendant of an African that was enslaved out here. So nobody has a positive origin. You gotta peep the game and finesse accordingly, man.
Would you mind telling me what your father's last name was?
My father didn't know his last name.
You see the goofy shit that this white man is doing? It's the exact same shit. See, what you guys will come to realize is that the so-called white man, really white men, they have the same playbook. They can't help but play the same games. Let's go back a little bit so I can get it in context.
He was once, his grandfather, or one of his forefathers, was owned by a white man who was named John.
So Malcolm is answering the question.
His name is Bunch. His grandfather was owned by a white man that was named Bunch.
Would you mind telling me what your father's last name was?
So what type of slick ass shit is this? Obviously, Malcolm and his father would have the same last name, or at least the name Malcolm previously went by. This so-called white man can't accept Malcolm just deciding to use X or going with X instead of another last name. So now he wants to force him. Okay, tell me what your father's last name is so I can just call you by that and try to antagonize you, get under your skin. And then when you react, I'm going to pull back and act like I don't know why you're reacting the way you're reacting. This is the white people one-on-one, man.
My father didn't know his last name. My father got his last name from his grandfather, and his grandfather got it from his grandfather, who got it from the slave master. The real names of our people were destroyed during slavery.
Was there any line, any point in the genealogy of your family when you did have to use the last name?
Look at this goofy ass nigga, man.
And if so, what was it?
The last name of my forefathers was taken from them when they were brought to America and made slaves. And then the name of the slave master was given, which we refuse. We reject that name today.
You mean you won't even tell me what your father's...
You see, brothers, you see what I'm getting at? It's just games, games, games. They can't help it. Malcolm has given this man the same answer 3 times in a row. Kudos to Malcolm. He's just answering whatever question is thrown at him. He's just answering it. He's showing very little emotion. just tact, he's just using logic,
Opposed.
and we can learn from that. We definitely got to be like that, because a lot of these white folks out here, and really just all these other demographics, they love to poke and prod and play games with us because they what, they're expecting a reaction out of us, and they understand that they live in a society, or they live in a system in which, when you finally decide to retaliate out of emotion, out of anger, out of frustration, the system's going to put you down. It's going to cast you aside. It's going to eat you up and shit you out. And they get to play whoever it is that was antagonizing you. They get to play dumb. They get to act like they didn't understand that the actions they were doing precipitated the reaction that you gave. They get to act like they're remorseful. You know what I'm saying? They get to act like they're going to make sure that moving forward, they're not going to pull the same shit with the next so-called black man. It's a never-ending game. It's a never-ending game. That's why here, us niggas, us TDF mob niggas, we make sure that we peep the game. But then we don't stop there. After we peep the game, after we understand the game, after we break the game down, we finesse accordingly. Meaning what? We go on the offensive. Okay? If you know that a white man or a Mexican man or whatever man you're about to deal with, if you know how they operate, how they think, then it's checkmate. Period. You shouldn't be thrown off. You shouldn't be surprised when you find out they don't give a fuck about you.
Whose last name was, or gifted last name was?
I never acknowledged it whatsoever.
Let me ask you about the status of Elijah Muhammad. First of all, is he ill?
I spoke to him today. He is in better health than he has been. He's suffering from asthmatic bronchitis.
Is that why he didn't attend your rally on last Tuesday?
The only reason that he didn't attend was his ill condition, and the weather here, especially on that particular day, was of such nature that it would have been almost insane for him to come.
Well, now, did you hold that meeting last Tuesday because it coincided with the general election, the primary election?
I think if you study the history of Mr. Muhammad's work and religious work in this country, we've had our convention on February the 26th every year for, I think, the past 33 years.
Well, now, while you don't care to discuss your former name or the name that the slave master gave to your antecedents, it is a matter of record that Muhammad's last name was Poole, Elijah Poole.
No, that's the name that his...
You see the game that this white man wants to play? He's stuck on the name shit. He can't move past it. He just can't move past it.
Slave master gave to his...
It is a matter of record that Muhammad's last name was Poole, Elijah Poole.
No, that's the name that his slave master gave to his grandfather or great-grandfather, but that's not his name.
Well, his mother and father thought when they called him Elijah Poole that was his name.
They didn't know any better.
You see that? You see that goofy shit? He said his mother and father, when they called him that, they thought that was his name. So, yeah, this guy is stuck on the name shit.
Well, if they didn't know any better or not, they thought that was his name.
Yes, sir. But, sir...
What I'm trying to find out is, when did he cease to be Elijah Poole and get to be Elijah Muhammad?
In 1931, I think it was, in Detroit, he was taught the true history of our people and made aware at that time that he was wearing an English name, and by not being an Englishman, he looked out of place. And his teacher gave him the name that he's wearing today, Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad.
All right, now when did he become what he purports to be in your literature, the son of Allah?
I've never heard the Honorable Elijah Muhammad referred to as the son of Allah.
The prophet of Allah. Okay.
I've never heard him referred to as the prophet of Allah.
What do you refer to him
Messenger of Allah.
All right, the messenger of Allah, and I appreciate the correction.
Yes, I mean, he says that a prophet is somebody who predicts the future, and he's not predicting the future, whereas a messenger is someone who carries a message that has been given to him by one who authors that message.
Why, now, who gave him the message, and to whom is it supposed to be delivered?
Master W.F.
Brothers, you guys notice how Malcolm is rapid fire with these answers? It's almost as if he doesn't even need time to think. That's how deft you gotta be. You gotta prepare beforehand. Whatever it is that you're doing, whatever it is that you're pursuing in life, you gotta make sure you come prepared. It's very clear. It's pretty obvious from watching this interview or from listening to this interview that Malcolm did his homework.
Muhammad, the one who taught him, is the author of the message. He gave it to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, which makes him the messenger. And he's to deliver that message of truth and righteousness to the 20 million American so-called Negroes, which means he's to teach us the truth, which will awaken us, and then show us how to live a life of righteousness, which will automatically qualify us for recognition as human beings by all other righteous human beings here on this earth.
Well, now, one other question. With reference to what Mr. Hurlbut asked you a little bit ago, you took a very moderate position of wanting independence without having any hatred for the whites. Do I understand that correctly?
Hatred is not involved in it whatsoever.
Well, I recall.
All right, listen to this closely. Because anytime as a so-called black man, even today, you try to exercise any kind of self-imposed authority, not even over others, just over yourself. You try to isolate yourself, do your own thing. Brothers, you'll notice that the other demographics, mainly the white folks, they try to label you as a hateful individual or as someone with an attitude problem or what have you. And that is not the case, of course. You're just somebody that understands the game. You understand that you have absolutely nothing to gain moving with people outside of your own, especially in a country where you've been marketed or you've been portrayed or depicted as a bottom feeder. Doesn't make sense for you to leave the herd as a not to say that's what we are, but it wouldn't make sense for an antelope to leave his herd of antelope and try to go roll with the lions. You know what's going to happen. Right? Doesn't make sense for a rat or a mouse to leave the other mice and try to go roll with snakes. Doesn't make sense for a sheep to wander from the herd purposefully and try to go roll with some wolves. Makes no sense. Roll with your own. If you want to ensure your survival, right? If you want to practice self-preservation the right way, you can start by caring about your own people and trying to build with your own people.
You took a very moderate position of wanting independence without having any hatred for the whites. Do I understand that correctly?
Hatred is not involved in it whatsoever.
Well, I recall in a recent plane crash, 2 or 3 years ago, or less than that, a charter flight on Air France in which...
Yo, I just noticed this man sound nervous as shit. That's what happens, man. Remember what I told y'all? Our energy. See, once you sharpen up, you sharpen up your mind, you sharpen up all your other tools and shit, people can't help but be nervous around you. They can't help it.
A group of people from Atlanta, Georgia, were, as they say in the business, as they took off from Orly Field. And you were quoted at that time as expressing great gratification that this tragedy had occurred. Do you recall that?
I recall it.
What did you say? Do you remember?
The press misinterpreted it and misrepresented it.
What did you say?
They said that it was made at a Muslim meeting. It wasn't. It was made at a rally of Negroes, Baptist, Methodist, Catholic, and otherwise in Los Angeles, who were rallying to protest the brutal shooting of 7 unarmed Negroes
and what did you
by
say?
Heavily armed white policemen in the city of Los Angeles. And because we are a people who have been taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to never carry weapons of any kind, but to get on God's side and rely on God to fight our battles for us, at the time that these brothers were shot down so brutally, I pointed out at the funeral of the brother who died that God would step in and take a hand in giving us some form of justice for the brutal killing of our brother. And when the plane crashed in France, I pointed out to the crowd at this rally that this was an act of God showing his wrath or complete resentment over the brutal form of injustice that had been inflicted upon our poor unarmed brothers.
Were you saying that, or do you believe that?
At that time, Dr. Billy Graham was in a crusade in Chicago, and the press, your papers here in this city, quoted Billy Graham of also saying that plane crash was an act of God. And if you take time to check the newspapers, I think that you'll find that this is correct. But no one thought that Billy Graham was so wrong when he attributed the crash of this plane to his God. But when we say that it come from our God, then we're looked upon as being, outrageous.
I know, but you took the position that this was a matter of satisfaction to you for an injustice done against you, and I think that that's a trifle severe.
We did not think that it was a coincidence that 120 of the whites on this plane came from the state of Georgia, a state that has the worst record in the history of America for the mistreatment of black people in this country.
Worse than Mississippi?
They maybe are a little less Mississippi is a little less hypocritical today than Georgia, but both of them are still practicing the same thing. Now the whites in Georgia bite Negroes with a smile, whereas they used to bite them with a growl. But they're still being bitten, and we don't think that it is any worse to be bitten with a smile than it is to be bitten with a growl.
And I don't either. And I would go as far as to say that in today's time, in 2020, not just white folks, but pretty much all these different demographics, all these different foreigners that come to this country, like to bite us so-called black men with a smile, right? Everybody feels like so long as they know enough about quote-unquote urban culture, hip-hop, sports, they feel like as long as they know enough about that, they're entitled to our friendship. But the game is this: these other demographics aren't interested in being our friends, or at the very least, they're not trying to be our real friends. Meaning, when your back is against the wall and you call onto these different demographics of people for help, they can and they will ignore you. They have their own cultures, their own traditions, their own countries, their own perspectives on this shit. And to top it off, they all actively choose, or I should say they're all also inundated with the negative portrayals of so-called black men and also of Africans. You have to understand that. So for those of you brothers that feel like you have friends of these other demographics, and from time to time you guys have these little racial discussions and conversations, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. Until you've been on that battlefield and you've looked to your left or your right or wherever, and that said individual was there with you, asking you, okay, what you want to do, how you want to handle this, you cannot consider them to be your friend. I don't give a fuck how much they knew about Tupac. I don't care how much of the baby they can quote. I don't give a fuck if they listen to who else. All these rappers from today, I don't care what they know about sports. It doesn't matter. We're not defined by that. There's more to us than that. And anybody that try to force sports conversations on you or hip-hop conversations on you as a means of getting to know you, that right there, that already should be a red flag. But let me go ahead and let Malcolm continue.
Mr. Calvert.
While we're on the subject of Mississippi, what is your organization's position of what happened in Mississippi in the past 6 months?
Such as what?
Such as the James Meredith incident and the enrollment of him in the university.
Well, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad wants justice for every one of the 20 million so-called Negroes. And to just take one Negro and stick him in college with the aid of 15,000 troops and at a cost of $6,000 is a disgrace. It's a waste of taxpayers' money. It's a farce. It's hypocrisy. Because if it's right for one Negro to be forced into that university, then every Negro in the state of Mississippi who is qualified has the same right to go to that university. And if the government is not ready and willing to enforce the right of every Negro in the state of Mississippi, then, in my opinion, sir, it's only hypocrisy to pretend that they are for justice by pushing one Negro in and blowing it up all over the world to make it look like they're solving the problem when millions of black people in that state are still going to segregated schools and getting an inferior education.
And this is a tactic that is heavily utilized in America right now, in this society today, where different institutions, different jobs, different environments, they always accept at least one so-called black person so that they cannot be accused of practicing racism, right? So they'll bring in one black guy and then make him the mascot. And then they'll turn around to all the other so-called black men on the outside of the situation and try to reassure them that, no, we're not racist. See, look. And they show them the mascot. See, brothers, this is you gotta be aware of all these types of finesses. You gotta be aware, because they're gonna play any kind of game they can to disarm you.
Does your organization encourage members to attempt to enter schools that have been known as all white?
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad doesn't discourage us from attending white schools, but he does say that it is better for us to go to our own schools, and after we have a thorough knowledge of ourselves.
Hey, this is very important. I'm gonna go ahead and rewind it. He's gonna talk about the school system a little bit.
Of our own kind to go
attempt to enter schools that have been known as all white?
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad doesn't discourage us from attending white schools, but he does say that it is better for us to go to our own schools, and after we have a thorough knowledge of ourselves, of our own kind, and racial dignity has been instilled within us, then we can go to anyone's school and we'll still retain our race pride, our racial dignity, and we will be able to avoid the subservient inferiority complex that most Negroes have, or that is instilled within most Negroes who receive this sort of integrated education.
Well, you have a private.
And you know, growing up in school, I always noticed how the smarter so-called black guys that were in my classes and shit, or that I had classes with, they always seemed to have this uptight, uppity Uncle Tom attitude, where it was just like, well, the white people like me better than you, so I'm automatically better than you. And Malcolm just summed it up beautifully right here. It's a subservient inferiority complex. And it's sad because, I mean, some of the most intelligent so-called black men fall victim to this mindset. And like he said, see, the Nation of Islam, on certain points, they just had the game figured out. You're better off during your early childhood going to school with your people and getting a sense of what Malcolm called racial pride, racial dignity, before you allow yourself to be educated by somebody outside of your culture, especially with the history between so-called blacks and so-called whites. If white people really truly owned black people back in the day, and black people were forced to work for free for 400 years, why would you then allow yourself to be taught by one of their offspring, by somebody who is the descendant of these people? It makes no sense. They're going to try to teach you how to tolerate that dynamic, or how to overlook it, or how to accept it. Makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. In other words, they're going to teach you how to have that subservient inferiority complex.
At school operating here in Chicago, at least, and possibly elsewhere, and it's been a subject of controversy lately. what is the acceptance of people who come out of your private schools into schools of higher learning?
Yes, we have many students who have graduated from the University of Islam on 54th and Greenwood that are now attending other schools. In fact, just as an example, one of Mr. Muhammad's sons never attended any school in his life but the University of Islam. He later attended DePaul University. He also attended the University of Chicago, and at present he's attending Al-Azhar University in Cairo, one of the oldest Muslim schools in the world. And his daughter-in-law also, who went to school here, is attending the University of Cairo. And then we have other students who have graduated that are attending other colleges and universities in this country. And in our school, we never have any delinquency problems. We never have any dropouts. We never have any disrespect for authority or disrespect for parents. We don't have any kind of juvenile delinquency. All of the things that the regular school system is complaining about, the critics and the most severe critics of Mr. Muhammad has to admit that we aren't plagued with those same problems in our own school.
I have listened to...
And that's because the kids are within their own culture. That's what a lot of these so-called white women don't understand when they're having such a tough time dealing with young male students of different ethnicities. The reality, white girl, is that they don't respect your authority. And then on top of that, you don't really respect them. You don't respect their cultures. So the situation is designed to fail. That's why in school, white girls and white boys seem to excel farther than anybody else. But that's because they're within a system or a framework that was designed for them, or at the very least is constructed by people that look just like them.
Your leader, at least on one occasion in convention here, it was 2 years ago, and at that time he advocated the separate state proposition of giving the what you call the so-called American Negro a separate state in which to live, to make their own way. Would you explain that philosophy, please? And have you had any support for it from anybody in official ranks?
Your first question first. To my understanding, what Mr. Muhammad has said is that he wants freedom, justice, and equality for the black people here in America, which you agree they don't have. If they did, you wouldn't have a race problem. And he says, if America cannot bring about freedom, justice, and equality for our people in this country, then America should allow us to leave. If we can't get along together, we should be allowed to depart and go someplace where we can set up housekeeping for ourselves. Then he says, if America doesn't want us to go back home among our own people, and at the same time they want to keep us here, since we can't stay here and get along together in peace, he says what America should do is separate part of the country and give us a section where we can live, and give us everything we need to get our particular section functioning independently. Support us for 25 years until we are able to function independently in a society of our own, and in this way the problem will be solved.
Yeah, this is where, me personally, I feel like the Nation of Islam or Elijah Muhammad was a little naive here. There was no way in hell America was going to do that shit. No way. Give you guys your own, or give so-called black people their own section of America and finance them for 25 years and then just allow them to exist doing their own thing. And the reason I say that is just because as a Ghanaian from Ghana, when I think about how America portrays not just Ghana, not just Nigeria, not just Kenya, not just Ethiopia, not just Eritrea, not just Tanzania, not just Uganda, but the entire damn continent full of so-called black people that have their own systems, their own traditions, their own philosophies, their own cultures set up. When I look at how America portrays them, you can tell there's an underlying fear/resentment of black rulership. Ghana was the first country in Africa to overthrow British colonialism, or just colonialism, period. And Ghana did not do this by marching to the capital and having nonviolent protests and all this other goofy shit. No, Ghana went to war. It was the Ashanti people, led by, I believe, the Asante Hene, Prempe. They led the revolution. You understand? They led the revolution and got Ghana its independence, its freedom. And then Kwame Nkrumah became the first president of Ghana. And then soon after that, I believe, Kenya got its independence, Nigeria got its independence, and just different African countries just started going to war and getting their independence. My point, the reason I say all that is just to bring attention to the fact that we don't learn about none of that shit in school. Conveniently, we don't learn nothing about any of that African history. All we learn is Africa is broke, is poor, they need food, they need water, they need 10 cents a day. That's all you learn. And that's wild. So watching this interview and hearing Malcolm say that the Nation of Islam was expecting the United States to just give them a section of the country and then finance them for 25 years. Look, I got love for Malcolm. I got love for what the Nation of Islam was doing, even though I'm not a Muslim. But nah, this idea was too naive.
Mr. McCune,
You say there's no juvenile delinquency. What is the discipline that you...
I can answer it, sir. A young so-called black man or so-called black woman is going to adhere to and respect the authority of a so-called black man. Period. That's it. That's the answer. You put a bunch of silly-ass, deceitful-ass, two-faced, racist white women in a classroom or as teachers for different classrooms. The problem is they're not even good at the game. So a good percentage of the kids are going to pick up on that fake-ass energy. And when they do, they're going to start to act up. Especially when you bring into account that a lot of the students don't have fathers at home. I mean, at that point, that classroom becomes a war zone. So when you bring the so-called black man in his right mind into a position of power, when the so-called black man accrues a level of power, a level of prestige within his own community, he'll begin to see that all his problems will be well solved. What grown ass so-called black man has a tough time raising his kids, or has a tough time disciplining kids?
Number one, excuse me,
Practice.
sir. One of the first things that Mr. Muhammad teaches is you have to set an example if you want others to do right. And he teaches the grown-up Muslims to live a highly disciplined and a highly moral life of high morals. And by the parents displaying the highest of morals in front of the children at all times, automatically this sets a pattern or an example for the children. And in our schools, our children, the emphasis is placed upon the recognition of authority. And by the children recognizing authority and respecting authority, it's easy for anyone who is in authority to teach the child and discipline the child and make the child aware of the importance of living a life in accord with the law even after he grows up.
How did you happen to join the Muslim movement?
I was in prison. I was a very wayward, criminal, backward, illiterate, uneducated, and whatever other negative characteristics you can think of type of person until I heard the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And because of the impact that it had upon me in giving me a desire to reform myself and rehabilitate myself for the first time in my life, and also being able to see the effect that it had upon others, this is what made me accept it. And plus, prior to hearing what he teaches, I had no interest whatsoever in anything serious or any kind of educational pursuits. And I noticed that after being exposed to the religious teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, immediately it instilled within me such a high degree of racial pride and racial dignity that I wanted to be somebody. And I realized that I couldn't be anybody by begging the white man for what he had, but that I had to get out here and try and do something for myself or make something out of myself.
I hope any of you brothers that are involved in these George Floyd protests heard that. You're not going to get anywhere, or we're not going to get anywhere begging another man for what he has. We have to get up and go get our own shit ourselves. Period.
What has been the growth of the Muslim movement? There are conflicting reports as to how many Muslims there are in the United States. Can you tell us?
Well, most critics say that the dissatisfied follow Muhammad, that the unemployed and the oppressed follow Muhammad. And I think you'll agree, the sociologists, the economists, and other experts say that the masses of black people are dissatisfied, unemployed, oppressed, and fed up. So that he actually gets his support at the mass level. But now you have other Negroes at the class level who pretend not to go for him, because usually their job has been given to them by the white man. They have positions to which they have been appointed, and they think that the only way that they can protect their job is by pretending in front of the white man that they don't go for Mr. Muhammad either. But you find
how many Muslims do you say there are in numbers?
I couldn't say. I've never heard him say, and he's the only one who would know.
500,000?
I couldn't say. I think that anyone who does say is not in a position to know, and anyone who knows wouldn't say.
What do you think that the Urban League and the NAACP have accomplished for your people? What's your attitude
in
toward
their
that?
own way, they have been doing their best to bring about freedom, justice, and equality and human dignity for the black people in this country. But today you have such an intense degree of dissatisfaction and impatience existing among our people at the mass level that it is almost impossible to come to them with a program that's going to take another 100 years to solve their problem, and they still be satisfied to wait. So that they have, the Urban League and the NAACP has done a good job within their understanding. But today it takes more immediate solutions. And the solution that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has is immediate. It's more practical.
You think they're not moving fast enough?
Well, they're moving as fast as they can. But that's not fast enough for the masses of black people. If a person is sitting on a warm stove and you get ready to let him up, no matter how slow you are, he has patience because it's only warm. But the masses of black people who are sitting on a hot stove, they're impatient. And no matter how fast you say progress is being made toward letting them up, that progress is not fast enough for them.
Well, the NAACP and the Urban League have both been critical of the Muslims.
The NAACP and Urban League have been maneuvered into criticizing us against their own will. Usually the divide and conquer tactics have always been used by the oppressor to keep the oppressed oppressed.
See that? He said usually the divide and conquer tactics are always used by the oppressor to keep the oppressed oppressed. So even way back then, they were trying to make these different so-called black movements bicker back and forth with each other, go into combat with each other, while they sit on the sidelines, eat popcorn, and then come back when it's all said and done and act like they're symbols of morality, of peace. See, this has always been the so-called white man's game in this country. It's always been his game. That's why you got to make sure you peep the game and finesse accordingly.
And the NAACP has been used against the Muslims. Efforts have been made to use us against them, but the Honorable Elijah Muhammad says he'll work with the NAACP, the Urban League, and any other Negro organization that wants to uplift the black man as long as it doesn't conflict with our religious principles.
Well, I remember once when Elijah was quoted as having said that the Urban League and the NAACP sold out to the white man. Has he ever made that statement
to my knowledge, I don't think that he has said that they sold out to the white man. I've heard him say that.
Is that his feeling?
The NAACP has been in existence for 54 years. And they elect a new national president every year, and they have never elected a black man to sit in that capacity. Arthur Spingarn has been president of the NAACP for 24 years. And so in this sense, it means that either they're practicing the same discrimination that they accuse the white man of practicing, they're practicing it themselves, or else they're not
qualifying other Negroes in that organization for positions of leadership. This is our only criticism.
You personally feel that they have sold out to the white man. You personally feel that those organizations have sold out to the white man.
I don't think that they would knowingly allow themselves.
You see how these questions are trying to incite division between the NAACP and the Nation of Islam? The divide and conquer tactics.
To be used or misused against their own people. So if they are failing to do the job that our people are expect of them, probably it's just through lack of understanding. But today their understanding is increasing, and you'll find that they're developing a better ability to work with all different factions for the betterment of our people.
Malcolm, how do you yourself feel about the white man?
I believe that the white man has done a great injustice to the black man in this country.
Honestly, I like the way Malcolm X, you ask him a question, he can just spit an answer out, right? Like immediately answer. That's what I'm getting at. He can just immediately begin to answer your question. There's no ums and ahs and I don't know, let me think about it. There's no stuttering. He just answers the question. That's how you know this man thoroughly prepared himself for these types of events, these types of situations. And he himself said that he had no real interest in reforming himself whatsoever. It was only after he was exposed to the teachings of the Nation of Islam or Elijah Muhammad that he began to take true education seriously. Not that goofy shit they teach in school, but just really reading books and becoming more enlightened, more aware of, your plight, of your environment. That's when he started to take everything seriously. So it goes to show that no matter how far left you are, you can always get back on the right track. You can always get back on the right path. You just have to want to do that. You just have to want to do that.
By having kidnapped our people and brought us here and down to the level that we're on today. And today, instead of approaching the factors that their original mistake has created, instead of approaching these factors objectively and realistically, the greatest sin that they're doing now is trying to pretend that they never committed a crime, that they never did any wrong. And when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad points out the injustices that our people are suffering, they make that sin worse by accusing him of teaching hate or by accusing him of black supremacy.
Yeah, when you start to peep game, when you start to understand what's really going on, and adapt or finesse accordingly, that's all they can do. Just try to throw you off and hope that you're scared of words like racist and misogynist and all this other shit.
Or by accusing him of advocating violence simply because he is pointing out the real factors in the problem.
We have a little time left. You don't have to hurry so much, Malcolm. You were born in Omaha, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And your family left Omaha when you were, what, 1 year old?
I imagine about a year old.
And why did they leave Omaha?
Well, to my understanding, the Ku Klux Klan burned down one of their homes in Omaha.
This made your family feel very unhappy, I'm sure.
Well, insecure, if not unhappy.
So you must have a somewhat prejudiced point of view, a personally prejudiced point of view. In other words, you cannot look at this in a broad academic sort of way, really.
You see how this man just tried to insult his intelligence? He's basically saying, since you've been personally affected or impacted negatively by so-called white people, you can't look at the overall situation in a academic or in a objective way. Basically, this man just tried to tell Malcolm that all this that you're doing right now is emotional. See, this is that slick shit that I'm talking about. You gotta know how to peep it. All right, now let's see what Malcolm says.
I think that's incorrect because despite the fact that happened in Omaha, and then when we moved to Lansing, Michigan, our home was burned down again. In fact, my father was killed by the Ku Klux Klan. And despite all of that, no one was more thoroughly integrated with whites than I. No one has lived more so in the society of whites than I. And it was only until I became a Muslim that I ceased living in the society
You
of
say
whites.
you are thoroughly integrated with the whites, Malcolm.
Yes.
Do you have white people in your family background?
Definitely, most Negroes in this country have whites in their family background because...
How are you going to differentiate between the white blood that's in you and the Negro blood that's in you? And you don't mind my using the term Negro because you use this yourself.
I use it interchangeably.
Damn, I think this white man, he needs to calm down. He was telling Malcolm to relax. I think he needs to relax. He's talking fast and shit.
I know you do. Why do you do that?
Well, I use it if it fits the purpose to use it, but I use it against my will.
Do you? But you
You
used it voluntarily in describing the incident in Los Angeles.
Still, I use it against my will.
I guess the teachings weren't thoroughly inculcated.
No.
You see, you hear what this nigga just said? Excuse me, what this white man just said? I guess the teachings weren't thoroughly inculcated. Inculcated means taught. So he's just throwing jabs at the Elijah Muhammad, at the Nation of Islam, at Malcolm's intelligence. Yeah, this guy's playing dirty right here, man. Let's go back a little bit.
Oh, but when
You say you are thoroughly integrated with the whites, Malcolm.
Yes.
Do you have white people in your family background?
Definitely, most Negroes in this country have.
This white man must be the leader of the group or something. So he's feeling some type of way. He's feeling owned. He's feeling disrespected. He's feeling humiliated maybe. So now he's trying to just play dirty and go back and forth with Malcolm. Let's watch this.
Whites in their family background
How are you going to differentiate between the white blood that's in you and the Negro blood that's in you? And you don't mind my using the term Negro because you use this yourself.
I use it interchangeably.
I know you do. Why do you do that?
Well, I use it if it fits the purpose to use it, but I use it against my will.
Do you? But you
You
used it voluntarily in describing the incident in Los Angeles.
Still, I use it against my will.
I guess the teachings weren't thoroughly inculcated.
No, but when I say to you that the cops in Los Angeles shot down 7 unarmed Negroes, every Negro in the audience knows what I'm talking about. But when I say that they shot 7 Muslims, then a lot of the Negroes don't realize.
I suppose you said 7 colored people because you say you use the term colored people. You said.
I don't think I used the word colored on this program.
Yes, you did. You did when you
started. Not colored.
I think so. Black people. I'm sorry. You did
black.
say black.
Well, we can use black, and that fits everybody.
Okay.
But sir, the black.
Now let me get back to another point that you made. You said that you go back home.
Yeah, I really don't like this man.
Now, what do you mean?
He's throwing his jabs. He's not really letting you answer it. It's the worst type of person to be caught stuck in an argument with.
Mean by back home?
I've only heard the Honorable Elijah Muhammad say, back among our own people. From
You
whence
said back home. You don't mind my saying.
Right, back home. But by that he means...
Do you mean back into the roots of Islam, or do you mean back to Africa?
Back.
He just keeps cutting them off.
Back home. And by back home he means back into our original civilization. And if you study history, the Islamic culture existed in West Africa,
But your
Central
family
Africa.
didn't come from an Islamic background originally, did it? I mean, you came from the proud tribes of Africa, which is
I think you'll find, sir, that the Islamic culture,
I agree, there is
existed widely in Africa, Central Africa, West Africa.
I agree. I've met.
Damn, man, can you let this man talk? See, he's mad. He got his feelings hurt.
Many people in there. Mr. O'Connor.
With regard to that tragedy out there in Los Angeles, I myself refer to it when it happened as the tragic police action, so I am not totally biased.
Thank you, sir.
Coming from Muhammad Speaks, which is the publication of your cult or your religion, Elijah.
And now this man calls the Nation of Islam, what they practice or what they are is a cult instead of a religion. Man, they got their feelings hurt today.
Muhammad referred to the policemen out there, the white policemen, as devils. He said, "There is no justice here for us black people. There is no future for us nor our children in civilized America." Doesn't that imply that you're going to get out, or that's his wish that you get out?
If he referred to those policemen out there as devils, who were heavily armed and knew that the Negroes whom they were shooting down in cold blood were not heavily armed, I don't think that those policemen themselves would deny that they're devils, nor would any Negro who witnessed such a deed deny that they are devils.
Well, about the other part of it, there's no justice here for us black people. There is no future for us nor our children in civilized America. And I didn't make that up. He said it in his own
And he's correct in what he says, sir.
Well, what does it mean? Does it mean you're going to get out? Or?
These white folks mad as hell, man. They getting emotional. They just want to get them so bad. They starting to realize, man, we've been sitting here damn near 30 minutes and none of us really got them.
It means the same thing.
There is no future for us nor our children in civilized America. And I didn't make that up. He said it in his own
And he's correct in what he says, sir.
Well, what does it mean? Does it mean you're going to get out? Or
it
what?
means the same thing that Attorney General Robert Kennedy means when he says that the #1 domestic problem in America is the race problem. That it is almost impossible to solve it. It's almost impossible to give justice to Negroes.
One brief thing further. I read also in Muhammad Speaks a quotation that Elijah Muhammad is the only person on earth who is on personal speaking terms with God. Do you believe that?
Definitely.
You do?
Definitely.
We're going to have to leave it at that. And Malcolm, I'm sure he's done a good job in rehabilitating you. It was a pleasure to have you on City Desk.
I'm in Chicago for the next 3 weeks at the local mosque at 54th and Greenwood for a special lecture series.
And then the man shouts himself out at the end. Wow. Yeah, brothers, if you guys want more videos like this, more reactions like this, I guess, or commentary, be sure to let me know because these videos are pretty long. Yeah, I'm looking at, damn, it's a whole hour long. Yeah, so if you guys aren't interested in this, go ahead and let me know so that I don't end up wasting any time, you know? And if there's more videos like this you want me to react to, just go ahead and comment the link below in the comment section. All right, y'all be easy. Y'all be safe out there. Y'all peep the game. Finesse accordingly. I'm out.